We go to our last panelist, not the least, Jean-Michel Dogné. He is a full professor at the University of Namur. He's also dean, and I understood actually that we have a very similar background, being both PharmDs and working in the medical faculty. You are very distinct in a way that you advise a lot the regulatory agencies and have been assessing many of the dossiers. So I'm very curious to hear your perspective on what we should be focusing on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. Happy birthday, of course. Indeed, as a regulator, I speak last. There will be also Peter Arlett. I guess it is just to make sure everybody else has said something we will have to regulate later. I could otherwise have said that it's not a coincidence, this is risk management. So, yes, indeed, over the past years, I have acted, and still today, as PAC rapporteur at the European Medicine Agency for several vaccines, including the one that nobody wants to name, and more recently also the ICCIC referral, which is the chikungunya vaccine, for which you know that there have been different conclusions at EU level compared also with the FDA. So both of which have demonstrated how complex and dynamic vaccine evaluation has become, particularly in balancing evidence generating before and after marketing authorization, especially as it was said today in a complex media and political environment. And indeed, as part of the regulatory process and rapporteur at the level of the PAC, like others who spoke this morning, I wanted also to share a bit of my experience during the COVID and how, to me, it changed really the way we do vaccine safety assessment. And indeed, I find myself in many ways right in the eye of the storm, being one of the unaware rapporteur of a series of vaccines. And earlier on, and Xavier Kurz is in the room, we work with Xavier Kurz to better prepare this pandemic and this COVID-19 vaccine discussion on how to best be prepared. And we used to work a bit together with Xavier Kurz. We used sometimes to run together at Canary Wharf at the European Medicine Agency in London. And we did maybe anticipate how we needed to run together to get prepared for this COVID pandemic. And the only, indeed, lesson learned was discussed a bit this morning, was the 2009 H1N1 pandemic, which at the end of the day did bring some interesting tools that we had to improve for the signal detection method, rapid detection method, for exchange, prioritization of information and assessment. But at that time, we did not have too much active surveillance system. And this is why and where we basically use quite rapidly the interest of having access to the so-called access program. And we'll see that this was a major concern since you know that these vaccines have been developing for the more rapid of the one in less than 1 year. And the preparedness was understood to be really the key to address all the safety issue. And we were quite confident then working on a database, working on safety signal, mainly from spontaneous reporting and preparing for observed to expected analysis using background incidence rate would be quite helpful indeed to address the key safety issue in a timely manner. And indeed, what we did was to update what we usually do in routine for routine activities, to transform them into additional activities, and especially in terms of preparedness with the different stakeholders, mainly the applicant, to update the risk management plan to have indeed a core risk management plan for the COVID-19 vaccines, and with a list of adverse events of special interest that was also discussed as part of the access program to estimate the background incidence rate, on top of traceability question and follow-up questionnaire. And we were quite ambitious also to have summary of safety data in a short period of time for monthly report rather than usually 6 months PSUR reports. And the key question was also, how will we address the question of the post-authorization safety studies? Meaning, what kind of database will we use? How the industry will also work either together or with some specific European infrastructure that could be in place. And this was the case back at that time for the access program. But now we have seen that more than ever it was indeed needed. And finally, as I have said, the management of the safety signals was to us a key issue, how to tackle the spontaneous reporting that we knew would overwhelm the system. And I must say that now, more than 5 years after, the most frustrating part of the job was how to deal with the post-authorization safety study. I think we lost a lot of time to assess some studies that were requested to the marketing authorization holder or the applicant, depending on the timing, while we knew that they would not deliver that much in a short period of time. And so it means that as regulators, as rapporteur, as member also of the team working at the level of the EMEA, we were really busy working on how to use the best methodology, how to use the best database to and how to assess a protocol for which they had many differences in terms of applicants, in terms of adverse event that would be followed. So it was clear already back at that time that even if we had good template protocol, that we needed to have a more robust working environment, and of course, especially with VAC4EU and also at EU level for the regulators for Darwin. And why? Because at the end of the day, it was a bit tackled this morning, but when you are dealing with all the cases, most of the safety signals emerged from spontaneous reporting, and for which we were overwhelmed. And nearly all key regulatory decisions were based on these reports, often triggered by the most dramatic cases, TTS, VIT, that was the synonym, capillary leak syndrome, even GBS and myocarditis, even if they were also later put on the spot based also on pharmaco-AP evidence. Spontaneous report triggered the decision-making back at that time. So it was a bit challenging to understand and to see how indeed what we did not anticipate, that still spontaneous report would trigger the decision-making, even in the absence of real-world evidence that would allow us to estimate not only some good absolute risk, but also some relative risks. And indeed, we therefore mainly relied on observed to expected analysis when data were available, and we know that for TTS you can expect what is expected in the list of adverse events of special interest, but when you have a new clinical entity for which by definition you will not have background incidence rate, you need first to come with new definition, but also therefore to have the database and the access to database to estimate the background incidence rate, and so of course that was the main difficulty. And when we look today at Europe evolving evidence ecosystem, we now have indeed key infrastructure that we know will fundamentally shape the future of this assessments and preparedness. So VAC4EU and mainly for the regulator, Darwin for EU. I must say there was not a PRAC meeting where we anticipate if a signal will be also addressed within this kind of network. Either if you are working for the pharmaceutical industry, for which you might be asked to have a post-authorization safety study outside of an initial risk management plan, but within then an updated risk management plan or a signal detection process. So this is now how we do, this is really the business that we do, and so we believe that any of these networks, VAC4EU and Darwin for EU at EMEA level, are not competing. They are complementary, they are serving different but connected functions in the real-world evidence chain. And I have cited one of them, the background incidence rate for vaccine before their launch is not only EU concern for preparedness. We have heard also during this panel that for the Mosquirix, for instance, we had this exactly with GSK, exactly the same question when we will use a vaccine in a region for which we do not have good background incidence rate. Some are also discussed by CEP where you will use some vaccines. So depending on how and if they will be assessed also at the level of the EMEA, this will be requested as a regulators as post-authorization safety study before the vaccine is launched. And so this exercise, and this is why I think VAC4EU has a long-standing existence in front of it, this exercise should be reproduced each year. We believe that the epidemiology, of course, of the disease is changed, especially since COVID, and we have now also new tools that would allow to have more precise estimate of this background incidence rate, adequately stratified, of course, and so this should be reproduced each year, even if with new adverse events that would emerge. So this is, of course, one of the future of this kind of consortium. And when a signal arises, whatever the source, but in a short period of time, as I have said during the COVID-19, these were mainly driven by spontaneous reporting, as for instance the TTS. I think this is where we have the key objective to me of VAC4EU and other networks is to provide protocols and studies for which we can have results, and the main difficulty is in the short period of time. This is where the improvement is surely needed as well, since this will allow us to embed quantitative benefit risk assessment into regulatory decision making. And why timing to deliver is key. All of you and some of us will remind some discussion, since politics did not wait regulators and promises of real-world evidence study results available at best in 2 or 3 months, at best, when you vaccine nearly 3% of your population every week. They want answer rapidly and they want to take decision rapidly. And so that's the main difficulty that we had, and it led indeed to some countries to withdraw some vaccination, and depending on the data that you had from estimate that mainly came from spontaneous reporting, you estimate that the cutoff was an age group or a gender group, so it was quite different. Another example is when vaccines are authorized primarily on immunogenicity data, as was the case for IXCHIQ. We need, therefore, as well, robust post-authorization studies to estimate not only the risk, as we do with post-authorization safety study, but usually when it comes from immunogenicity data, the power of this study is really more limited than post-authorization safety study are even more important. But we need also post-authorization efficacy study or effectiveness studies. And this is why we had struggled when we had to reconsider the benefit risk of IXCHIQ vaccines to confirm if the benefit risk remained positive when we do not have clinical evidence of the efficacy or the effectiveness, especially with limited usage of the vaccine. So there is today more than ever a lot in terms not only on post-authorization safety study, but also on post-authorization efficacy study. And you know that the commitment and the decision-making from the regulators is therefore up to the obligation from the industry to perform these studies. And this is where, indeed, I believe that VAC4EU play a crucial role. Is in practical terms, this means that these stakeholders can conduct EMEA-aligned post-marketing studies using the methodological standard that regulatory trust, but within a neutral, independent environment that guarantee also scientific credibility. I believe also that VAC4EU should continue to provide capability for prospective primary data collection. We have also discussed with that this morning, especially particularly during the early phase of the vaccine rollout. On top of spontaneous reporting, these primary data collection on vaccine is really key for not only the regulators, but also for the public health authority within weeks, usually after the vaccination, rather than within months. To me, another key area where VAC4EU should continue to play an instrumental role is vaccine safety in a specific population. You know that back also with the COVID-19, we had usually, and it was discussed this morning, the key question, what do we do with pregnant women? What do we do with immunocompromised population? And in the NITAC, I'm also part of the NITAC, we decide that this group should be a priority. And in terms of public trust, it's quite difficult to explain how we do a priority of a group, especially with a new platform vaccine, for which you have no clue, not only on the efficacy, but also on the safety of the data in this immunocompromised and population, and for instance, a pregnant population. So there, of course, we knew and we know that if we had still a pandemic today, that we would have the same concern, but having some dedicated past studies with an environment that for which we have templates in terms of already available good protocol, and with a network that now is working, I think we can shorten the time for which we might have the results. And on top, as mentioned also this morning, I think that VAC4EU has to continue on developing methodological tools and reflection to address causality assessment at population, but also individual level. And we have seen that only based on this spontaneous reporting, we had to take decisions during COVID period that changed the way the vaccine were used differently in different countries. What are the risk factors associated to the development of TTS in some specific population? Is it mainly males, female, younger adults? Therefore, I think that the risk factors should be addressed, especially when we have a specific signal for which we can have, using real-world evidence, quite rapidly more information. Developing the use of omics science in data collection is also, to me, a major orientation to be addressed, again, in the future of real-world data collection and assessment, especially for the causality assessments. And last but not least, based on these information, I think that every network, especially recognized network as VAC4EU, should play a major role in terms of education, and you have mentioned the educational part of VAC4EU, and also to contextualize the results to support communication in different countries, but also at EU level. To conclude, as someone deeply involved in regulatory science, I strongly believe that the success of European preparedness depends on how well we connect this system, Darwin EU, VAC4EU, European Health Data Space. We discuss also with the ECDC, the CEPI and WHO. I must say also that one of the main difficulties that we have when we did observe to expected analysis, when we had whatever the adverse event, was to have access to the patient exposure in the short period of time, stratified by age and gender. And there we had huge help from the NITAC and from the ECDC. And so if we do not have, I heard this morning, the denominator, some of the denominators include also the patient exposure, we need to connect to have this information. And now I think we have learned a lot from that, so we need to connect. Why? Because we ensure that these real-world data, when transformed into real-world evidence, is both regulatory grade and publicly trusted, that it is how we build the confidence in the vaccine. You may have heard the famous saying, good, fast, or cheap, pick two. It reminds us that excellence, speed, and low cost rarely go hand in hand. If you want to have good evidence, if you want to have it fast, you need to put money on the table. And today, when it comes to collecting and analyzing data, whether primary or secondary, to address key questions of vaccine efficacy, safety, and use, we cannot compromise. We need both quality and rapidity, especially in an area of fake news, misinformation, and political challenges that question more than ever the trust in the vaccine. That's why I think that innovative initiatives such as VAC4EU are also essential to deliver reliable, timely evidence that trust informs public health. They must be adequately and sustainably funded. Thank you very much.